In today's show, I'm going to share with you the 5 reasons I have for switching from Lightroom Classic to DxO Photolab 8. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, and I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. I think it's pretty fair to say that Adobe Lightroom Classic and Adobe Photoshop are 2 of the most popular and recognized raw photo editors in the world today. But Adobe has been really, quite honestly, no other way to say it, has been pissing off a lot of people over the years. And there's a lot of things that have been coming up over the past year or so that is really adding to the frustration of a lot of photographers. Over the past several years, a lot of people have been looking to get out of the Adobe ecosystem and get into something else. And a lot of that has been based on the fact that Adobe went from a system of where you could purchase their programs or software for a single price to the subscription-based services. And a lot of people just don't want to go down that road. So I wanted to take today to kind of talk to you a little bit about these issues going on. And I wanted to share with you the 5 reasons that I have personally for moving from Lightroom Classic into DxO Photolab 8's ecosystem. And I have made the change, and quite honestly, I know it's in its infancy stages, but I am extremely happy with my decision so far, and I really don't see that changing. I know that I reviewed DxO Photolab 8 a while ago for you guys. I shared that in a video as far as, hey, this could be a real Lightroom Classic killer. And some of you commented on it that you've gone with DxO. Others, I think, commented about, some of the features that Lightroom has to offer, and it kind of prevented you from wanting to make the switch. And I get that. I don't think that Lightroom Classic, I'm not here to say that it's a crap program or that you shouldn't use it or do any of those things, right? I just want to share with you the reasons why I switched. Because if you're a newer photographer who's looking to figure out what program, what ecosystem that you want to use when it comes to your photo editing, or perhaps you're someone else who has a photo editor and you're trying to figure out what your future holds in that regard, maybe some of the information that I'm going to share with you today will be beneficial in helping you to make a decision that's best for you and your photography work. I want to stress right off the rip, because this is always something that comes up with any YouTube reviewer who's reviewing a product, a software, whatever the case may be. I am in no way, shape, or form affiliated with DxO Photolab 8. This is not a sponsored video. They have no idea I'm making it. This is simply just my honest opinion based on my own experiences. So with that being said, let's jump into the 5 reasons why I switched from Lightroom Classic to DxO Photolab 8. And the first one for me is going to be the subscription-based services. Now, if you are a newer photographer getting into the Lightroom Classic and the Adobe ecosystem, you're going to be looking at a cost of $19.99 a month. Now, granted, you do get 2 programs for that cost, right? Which is a pretty good deal as far as what you're getting as far as power. But it's still a monthly bill, a monthly expense. And it may not seem bad when you're looking at it from a $19.99 a month. But if you add that up over the course of a year, over the course of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, how much money are you actually going to be spending on those monthly subscription services? And for me, that was a consideration. Yes, it's nice to have the subscription service in the sense of you always have the latest and greatest updates that Adobe pushes out. But I have to tell you, we're going to talk about another reason a little bit later on in this show as to why I'm switching from Lightroom Classic, and it has a little something to do with those updates. The subscription-based plan is right for some people and not for others. And this is pretty obvious, right? You have to make that decision as far as what's right for you. I wanted to get into something that was a more of a purchase a program. Yeah, I purchased DxO, right? And it's $229 to purchase the program. But quite honestly, they do have a lot of specials, a lot of sales that are going on. And so I was able to find one just by searching the internet to get 15% off. So DxO actually came out to less than $200 for me. So the initial investment is kind of comparable to a year of Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop, right? From the subscription-based cost perspective. But you buy that once and now you have the program. Will you have other costs down the road with DxO? Of course, right? Because somewhere along the line, they're probably going to come out with DxO 9 or whatever it is, right? Whatever it's labeled. But when they do that, because I'm an existing customer, DxO historically has offered a 50% discount to their existing customers when they are releasing a new version of a program that you have. So that $229 goes down to $115. And for me, I think that's a pretty damn good deal, right? So maybe they release a new version every 2 years. So every 2 years, you're spending about $115, $120, whatever the case may be. That's quite a savings if you look at Adobe and its monthly subscription costs at $19.99 a month. You're going to be saving probably about half the money when you look at it from that perspective. So something you need to look at. What do you want to do? Do you want the subscription or do you want the one-time purchase? Now, what I will also be doing, because of the fact that I'm getting rid of Adobe Lightroom Classic and Adobe Photoshop, I purchased DxO, as we've been talking about. And then for my Photoshop replacement, I will be purchasing Affinity Photo 2, which is basically a version of Photoshop. And so for my needs in Photoshop, this is going to be everything that I need and more. Quite honestly, with the advancements that were made in Lightroom Classic over the years, I was finding that I was going into Photoshop less and less every year because Lightroom was just so efficient in a lot of its editing capabilities. It got a lot better. You know, Lightroom Classic many years ago, the remove tools and different things like that weren't really the best tools. And the masking tools weren't really, that great. So those more complex edits, you were going into Photoshop. And so that's when I really use Photoshop the most. But with those advancements in the software for Lightroom Classic, I just really didn't go into Photoshop all that much. So that's not a huge loss for me. This is going to be dependent on what your editing style and what your editing workflow is like. Maybe you have more of a need for Photoshop, and maybe that will be reason enough for you to stay within the Adobe ecosystem. But subscription, monthly costs, big reason for my decision, and a big reason why many other photographers have left Adobe. The second thing that really kind of irritates me about Adobe, and you may or may not have seen this if you watch different photography YouTube channels, but Adobe, with the advancement of AI, right, artificial intelligence, has been putting out a lot of marketing materials to people, essentially saying, hey, guess what? Skip the photographer. You don't need a professional photographer. Just use our tools, our AI tools that we have, and you can essentially create whatever you want to create. They are essentially shooting their customers in the foot, right? Because these are the people, including myself, who have been paying Adobe a monthly fee for years and years and years. I mean, I'm almost 15 years, somewhere around there, if I'm doing the math correctly, in which I was paying a monthly fee to Adobe, right? And even though I was paying $9.99 a month, I mean, add that up. That's $120 a year over nearly 15 years. I mean, that's a fair amount of money, but that's just me, right? That's just one little person. And that's just me who had the photography plan where you get Lightroom Classic and you get Photoshop. There are other photographers out there that were paying a lot more because Adobe has different levels different plans that you can choose from in which you get some more products. But if you get the full suite, which many photographers had, it was like $50 a month. I mean, think about how pissed you might be if you're a professional photographer spending $50 a month with Adobe and they're telling your customers, don't hire you, go to our AI features and our AI tools, and we can create whatever you're looking for. To me, that's just not good business. I don't think it's very moral or ethical, and it's really pissed a lot of people off, and a lot of people have jumped ship when it comes to Adobe for this specific reason. This is something that you too will need to decide. You may be getting Lightroom Classic, you may be getting Photoshop, but you may not be charging anyone for your work. You may be just an amateur photographer, a hobbyist, right? Whatever the case may be, but you may not be charging. And so that may not be a real big issue for you. But I think nonetheless, you're still human and you can still appreciate, what a professional photographer might be going through to hear those kind of sentiments being said by Adobe. And it's just not a good business model. The third issue that I had personally with Adobe Lightroom Classic were some of the software bugs that you would find. Now, I'm not saying that DxO Photolab 8 will be excluded from having software bugs or any other software for that matter. I think anytime we're dealing with technology, we're dealing with software, we're gonna deal with bugs at some point. But what I was finding was that I was dealing with a lot of the same issues, the same bugs with the Adobe Lightroom Classic software. One of the things that I would deal with is during the process of uploading photos into a new catalog for Adobe, Adobe builds what is referred to as previews. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but when you're editing a photo inside of Lightroom Classic, you're not actually editing your actual photo. You're editing essentially a preview of the original photo. And that's how Adobe and many other raw photo editors do it. It's non-destructive editing, right? So you're not actually editing that original photo. They kind of give you a preview image and you're editing it. And then there's a text file, if you will, that is created with all of the instructions that basically outline every edit you did with your file. And that's kind of what they reference. And that's how you see the edits that you've applied to a photo. So when you're uploading your photos initially, Adobe is going to go in and kind of build these previews. And a lot of times when I was uploading my photos, it would just stall out. There would be a bar in the upper left-hand corner, right, showing the progress of your upload. And it would constantly get stuck on the fetching previews part of the process. And I would sit there literally for hours while it was doing that. And I would go do other things, but I'd come back and it would still be stuck in that same place. So the problem with that, it's fixable, right? Typically what was happening is I would find that I had to eject my disk, shut down Lightroom, restart everything, and my previews would be there. But it was more of a nuisance, a hassle, right? It's just the fact that I had to shut down everything, unconnect disks and reconnect disks. And it's just not convenient. And it's just not a good part of a workflow when you have to do things like that. Other things that really bothered me is the masking tools inside of Lightroom Classic. Now, I've done videos quite a bit on the masking features inside of Lightroom Classic. And I do love the masking features, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a second. I do love the masking features, but they are kind of a double-edged sword for me. They're AI based, right? So you basically can go in and you can take a brush and you can paint over something, or you can choose to select something like a sky or a background or a subject. And Adobe will evaluate your picture and select what it deems to be the background or the subject or the sky. So it's going to help you along that process. And it really is an amazing tool. And the masking features is something that you had to do manually not all that long ago in the past. And it was a really labor intensive process to do masking. I mean, in fact, there are professional editing companies that used to exist where people actually, that was their main job, right? Doing selections, doing masking, where you are basically highlighting a certain part of your image that you want to apply an edit to, and everything around it will be unaffected, right? So that's what masking is. But what was happening is that when Adobe was doing some of their more significant updates, pretty much every photo that I have in Adobe Lightroom Classic uses masking, because that was just kind of my editing style. So what was happening is these Adobe Lightroom Classic updates would be pushed through. I would update Lightroom Classic, and then I would go back in, and every single photo in my library, in my catalog, would have an error. It would say, there would be an exclamation mark on some of my masks, and it would say mask needs to be updated. Well, that is a real problem, because when you see that, your masks aren't showing on your edits. So it basically means you would need to redo all those masks or update those masks. Now, there is a mask fix to it, if you will, where you can highlight all your photos, and there's a way to go in and click on and update all masks. And in theory, that is supposed to work. But what I found in my experience was it worked for a large number of photos, a group of photos, but it didn't include every photo that I needed it to include. So it wasn't the most effective way of going about and updating. So I found that many times I was updating the same group of photos all the time, and for some reason, the updates just weren't taking hold. They weren't taking effect. So I'd have to go in one by one, go into the mask, click on Update Mask, Adobe would fix it, and then I'd have to go to the next photo. This is not convenient in the least. Not convenient in the least. And so I just never found it to work like it was supposed to when it came to doing that. So it really kind of deterred me from wanting to use the masking feature inside of Lightroom Classic. And lastly, some of the other software bugs that I had problems with is when it came to backing up a Lightroom catalog. Now, I always kind of set up my Lightroom catalogs. You can choose how you want to back up your Lightroom catalogs when you create one. You can go under the preferences section in Adobe Lightroom when you're in a catalog, the catalog preferences, and you can set how often you want Adobe Lightroom to back up your catalog. So you can set it up like once per week or whatever you have. You'll see the different options when you check it out. But I always set mine up so that it backed up every time I exited that catalog or shut down Lightroom, because I always want a current backup when it comes to Lightroom. And that was always one of my stresses with Adobe Lightroom Classic, was always having a current backup of everything you've done. And keep in mind that the backups created by Adobe Lightroom Classic are not backing up the photos in your library. They are backing up the edits that you are making to those photos, right? That's what I was talking about a few minutes ago when we were talking about preview images. You make edits and it makes a text file with essentially the instructions of what edits you apply to that photo. That's what it's backing up. It's not backing up your images. So if you accidentally delete an image from your catalog, yes, your chances are you're going to lose that image if you don't have some other safety net in place. But those are the software issues that really kind of annoyed me and irritated me through the years of using Adobe Lightroom Classic. Number 4 for me, and this is the big one for me. As we go down this list, these issues for me are getting bigger as far as what really matters to me. Number 4, the catalog system in Adobe Lightroom Classic. This is a double-edged sword because the catalog system is great in many regards and it's crap in many others as far as I'm concerned. I feel that it's a great cataloging system, right? It's a great database management system to manage your photos. You can do a lot of great things with adding keywords and adding different information to your photos. And so when you get into catalogs that have thousands and thousands of photos, if you want to find a photo with a specific thing, well, you can just do a search and pull up the photos and really narrow down the search, right? Maybe you have 5 photos with a certain criteria. Do you really want to look through 30,000 images to try to find those 5 photos that fit your current needs? No, but you have to make sure you're doing a good job of adding all that data when you upload your photos, right? So that takes a little bit of work, and that's not a knock against Adobe Lightroom Classic, because you would have to do this with any kind of photo management system. But the problem that I had with the catalog system was when you make an Adobe catalog, which is going to be where you house your images, and there's all sorts of different ways you can do it. When I first started Adobe Lightroom Classic, it was recommended that you created a catalog for every different thing you did, right? So when I was photographing weddings, I didn't just have one catalog for weddings. I had a catalog for each and every client and their wedding, because Adobe Lightroom Classic back then was not very advanced in some regards. And specifically what I'm referring to is if you had a catalog that started to creep up with the number of photos, maybe 10,000 photos, that may have been probably right around the breaking point where you would see a significant decline in the performance of Lightroom Classic when the photos became too high. But that is something that they have improved over the years. And now it's kind of recommended that you don't need to have a catalog for every different thing you do. You can have one catalog, and then you can kind of create subcatalogs within that, right? So you could have, Bob Smith Photography could be your main catalog. And then within there, you can have different catalogs for wildlife, travel photos, sports photos, whatever the case may be. Whatever you do, you could set it up by date, by genre. You have a lot of options when it comes to all of these things. The problem for me with cataloging systems is that when you set up Adobe catalogs, you really want to make sure that you are setting it up on a disk that has a lot of space. And you also want to set it up on a disk that is quick, right? Maybe like an SSD drive, something along those lines. Because when Adobe is trying to do the editing features and all of those different things, the faster, the drive is, the more responsive your editing will be. But also, here is the thing with the catalogs that just drove me bonkers over the years. And I felt like this is something that should have been fixed or updated by Adobe a long time ago. You have to be very careful when you create Adobe catalogs as to what you do if you make any changes to the information inside that catalog. If you move your Adobe catalog from one disk to another because your disk is filling up, or you change the name of an image or a file folder or anything along those lines, it can wreak havoc inside of Lightroom. You need to make all of those changes inside of Lightroom Classic. If you are just out, roaming around your computer and you move files that Adobe Lightroom sees through its software, right? It knows that this folder with these images is sitting right here. If you're outside of Lightroom and you move that folder somewhere else, when you go back into Lightroom, you're going to have little warnings on every photo. Hey, this photo is missing and I can't find it. Now, again, I want to stress, there are fixes. There are ways to resolve this, but it's happened to me and it can be a huge pain in the ass. And that is what it comes down to, is if you forget, if you make a mistake, if you change something and, it's just a moment of poor judgment, it can really create hours and hours of headaches for you. I always hated that. And that is one of the big attractions for me when it comes to DxO Photolab 8. It works like any other Finder option on your computer, right? So when you're in DxO, you just have to navigate to the folders where your images are, and it instantly recognizes them. You don't need a special catalog. You can move them to another disk. You can move them to another location on your disk, whether you're in DxO, whether you're outside of DxO. It doesn't matter. There's never going to be a communication issue with DxO and where your photos are located. You just go into DxO and navigate to them, and there they are. So that is a big thing for me, because working with Lightroom catalogs was always a stress for me. Even though I know how to work with Lightroom catalogs, just always a stress for me, because I know they can be a little finicky at times, a little temperamental, and I just didn't want to take any chances of losing photos or losing a ton of time trying to fix a silly mistake. So that's a big one for me. That's something that you will have to decide for yourself as well. Lastly, and this is another real big one for me, is the overall approach to photo editing. I was saying earlier that one of the things that I really liked about Lightroom Classic are some of the features, and I still do to this day. I'm not trying to say that Lightroom Classic doesn't have any value or it's not a good program. There are great things about it, and they really have made masking easier. And it's become very easy with the AI features that they've, put into place over the past several years, and it just continues to get better and better in that regard. But what I have found is that Adobe Lightroom Classic for me felt like more of an assembly line, right? I would go out, spend hours taking pictures of wildlife, and then I would come back and I would upload them. And I'm kind of a person, and I don't know if you can tell this from the videos, but I'm kind of a hyper person, right? Everything I do is pretty quick. I'm either going 0 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour. And Lightroom Classic only helped to fuel kind of my anxiety, right? My need to go fast with everything. And so that's kind of how the masking tools fit into my workflow. It allowed me to go really, really quickly, and I would get really focused. I could feel myself getting really focused on just getting the photos edited, more so than slowing down a little bit and focusing a little bit more energy and a little bit more attention on my actual edits. This is what I love. Another big thing with DxO Photolab 8 that I love. It is a editing program that really is, as they pretty much say, I won't have the exact verbiage right now, but it's for photographers, passionate photographers who want the most from their images. And I get their tagline, man. Their tagline is spot on, because that's how I see DxO, right? It's kind of for more of the purist photo editor who really enjoys taking their time a little bit more. You can still move quickly. It's not like it's going to be 10 years, right, to edit a bunch of photos, but it slows you down. It slows you down, and it makes you a little bit more deliberate with your editing process. And it makes you think a little bit more about what you want to do with a photo. That may be good for you. That may not be good for you. That's great for me. All right. That's great for me with a person who just has one speed and it's fast. It forces me to slow up. It forces me to reconnect with the editing process. And that is something that I have gotten a lot of enjoyment out of with DxO Photolab 8. Go back to that Lightroom Classic mode where it felt like an assembly line. How many photos can you pump out, right? How many photos can we do in an hour? I got to get these in and get these done. That was my mentality. And I think it was just because Lightroom is trying to offer you everything they can from an editing standpoint, right? Every little detail that they can. And there's some nice features that come with that, some nice advantages that come with that. But I do believe that Photolab produces a much better image at the end of the day when you edit your image and you export it. And I did this test before when I was comparing DxO to Lightroom Classic. I would do edits in both programs and look at it, and I was generally always happier with the image that was coming from DxO Photolab 8. I feel like it produces images with better colors. The noise reduction program that DxO has, I've talked a lot about their noise reduction software. It is regarded as the best in the industry, and I've tested it in relation to Topaz Photo AI. I've tested it next to Lightroom Classic's own AI noise reduction, and I would agree that DxO is the clear winner when it comes to these other programs. Topaz AI, great product. I would highly recommend it if you want to go that route. But I do think there are some artifacts that come with Topaz Photo AI that you don't get with DxO. Topaz AI, sometimes after you applied a noise reduction, you could almost see in your background like a grid pattern that had been kind of burned into your image. So it would do some weird things like that sometimes. So again, I don't see that with DxO. That hasn't really been an issue for me. It just really reduces the noise and applies a nice level of sharpening to the image, and it just comes back with a lot of detail. And I really, really like that. The other thing that is really great about DxO is, most raw photo editors will have some sort of lens correction feature to their software. DxO goes much deeper when it comes to this than any other photo editor. They actually build everything around your specific lens, whereas these other raw photo editors are taking a little bit more of a cookie cutter approach. So this goes deeper in DxO, and it just does a much better job of applying corrections to fix the faults of the lens you're using. And every lens has its faults. I don't care how expensive, how good it is. There's always something about a lens where there are some imperfections that come from it, just the way it is. But those guys are the 5 reasons why I switched from Lightroom Classic to DxO Photolab 8. I hope there is something that you relate to in this particular video, and I hope that it helps you to decide maybe what you should do and where you should look when choosing your raw photo editor. And let me know if you have any questions about DxO or Lightroom Classic. If there's anything I can answer for you, I'd be happy to do that. Let me know if you learned something here today. If you did, please be sure to like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. But until then, good luck with your wildlife photography. Good luck with your photo editing, and take care.